Are you guys ready up there?
Almost one moment.
Alrighty, I will now call the June 11th, 2024 Joint Planning Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission meeting to order. Could I please have roll call?
Commissioner German? Here. Commissioner Pop? Here. Commissioner Heller?
Here.
Commissioner Inman? Here. Commissioner Kaiser is absent. Commissioner Plenty Tenbrook? Here. Commissioner Morris?
Here.
Commissioner Rhodes? Here. Commissioner Slater is absent. Commissioner Strauss?
Here.
Commissioner Strong? Here. Commissioner Tigan? Is absent. Commissioner Truitt?
Here.
Commissioner Rendell?
Here.
Commissioner Weathers? Commissioner Zimmerman is absent.
Excellent, thank you. The commission will now hear testimony from the public concerning items not on the agenda. Is there anyone wishing to speak at this time? All right, I don't see anybody. So we're not going to be doing any approval of minutes tonight. We'll be doing that at the respective meeting that we have for each commission. We're just going to go ahead and move us on to the public hearing. Oh, we do have. Oh, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, let me get my official language up here. I will now open the public hearing for our code amendment case number CA 2401 for proposed amendments to the Salem Revised Code to promote the development of housing and comply with state laws and rules. Could the recorder please read the hearing procedure into the hearing procedure statement into the record?
This is a public hearing to consider code amendment case number CA 2401 for proposed amendments to the Salem Revised Code, updating the city zoning and development code known as the Unified Development Code. The criteria applicable to this application are found in Salem Revised Code, Chapter 110.085B, Amendments to the Unified Development Code. Failure to raise an issue prior to the close of the public hearing, the statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Planning Commission, the Historic Landmarks Commission, and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. A similar failure to raise constitutional issues relating to proposed conditions of approval precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony. The Planning Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission will then either continue the public hearing or leave the record.
Excellent, thank you. And for the record, Commissioner
Tigan, yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Sorry.
No problem. Can I see if there's any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts that any commissioner member would like to declare at this time? Okay, looks good. Then we'll go ahead and do the staff presentation.
Great. Good evening. Landmarks Commission, Planning Commission. I'm Eunice Kim. I'm the Long Beach Planning Manager for the City of Salem, the Planning Division. And I'm here tonight to present the staff report for Code Amendment Case CA 2401. My colleagues, Mr. Bishop and Mr. Morris, will also be presenting tonight. I'd like to enter the staff report and presentation today. So periodically, the city updates our Unified Development Code or our zoning code. roughly every other year. As new issues arise in the community, as clarifications and conflicts come up that we can address, or as new state laws and rules come into play, we update the code to make sure we're in compliance and keeping up with community authorities. The last time we did a major update to the code was in 2022 with the R-Salem project, which was an update of our comprehensive plan, as well as we did an additional update to the code that include our tree preservation regulations. This code amendment really focuses on housing. In Salem, we know we need more housing and we're always striving to figure out how we can encourage more housing development. So this code amendment really focuses on 3 ways of encouraging more development as it relates to housing. One is to streamline the approval process. The other is to allow more housing options. And then the third is to revise our standards to promote more housing. And we're always looking to also comply with new state rules and laws. So the first proposed change I'm going to talk about tonight has to do with adjustments to our design standards. So there are several areas throughout the city where we regulate the design of sites or the design of buildings. So if you think about places where we require awnings or canopies, places where we require parking to be behind buildings. These are examples of design standards that we have throughout the city in specific areas. In all of the areas and all the zones with overlay zones currently in the city where we have design standards, except for 3, we allow for adjustments to those design standards. So what that means is there's an administrative process for approval if you cannot meet a specific design standard. Like again, like a canopy or requirements for awnings, requirements for ground floor windows, things like that. There are 3 areas, 3 zones: the West Salem Central Business District, the Edgewater 2nd Street Mixed Use Corridor, and the Portland Fairgrounds Overlay Zone, where currently today we do not allow for adjustments. Instead, if you cannot meet a design standard, you're kicked to a public hearing process, which I explained the difference today here. So today, if you don't meet a standard, you go through design review, which again is a public hearing process. This is an opportunity like today, people can come and testify. It can often add time, uncertainty, and cost to a project versus an adjustment process, which is an administrative review and approval, where there's still opportunity for public comment, but not a public hearing. We have been moving this way as a city to streamline the approval process, particularly as it relates to housing in the last few years. And we've done this, for example, with all of our multifamily design standards. Similar to the last change, we're proposing to also allow adjustments to specific special uses related to housing. So special use is a use that's allowed outright in a zone, but there's specific standards like special setbacks or maybe some design for that specific use. Some examples are accessory dwelling units, for example. So these special uses currently today, there are specific ones like townhomes, where you cannot meet a setback for special use, then you have to go through a conditional use permit, which again is a public hearing process. We are proposing in this code amendment to allow for adjustments to those special use standards. This again aligns with kind of how we've been moving as a city, as we've been adopting more different types of housing, like ADUs, middle housing, things like that. So this would align that process. It allows for essentially deviation from those special use standards through an administrative process. Oh, I'm going to pass them on to Mr. Bishop.
Another process improvement that we're trying to implement here with this amendment for streamlining the review for residential is the process that applies to historic design review in districts and applicable to individually listed resources throughout the city if you are doing new housing. So today, as the historic landmarks commissioners know, there are 2 types of historic review. There's minor and major. There's 2 types of minor and there's 1 type of major. Major is a public hearing process that goes before the Landmarks Commission, and then minor reviews are done by staff. And it depends on, and whether you're minor or major depends on what you're doing and the facade that you're altering. So under this process, which is a requirement of state law to have an administrative process that applies to developments that include new housing. So that's part of the reason for this amendment is to requirement to have a staff level process for housing to streamline the process in all areas. It was to establish a type 2 process for any development, whether it be new construction in the historic district or an alteration or an addition in the historic district or affecting the property that's created. So housing units in the historic district or individual property, and have the ability to choose to go through a class 2 review by staff. And if they don't meet a standard, rather than going through the guidelines through a major review, they would have the opportunity to ask for an adjustment to that standard that would also be reviewed by staff. The options we've given are essentially four. There will still be the option for an applicant to choose if they want to go through the landmarks commission to head through review subject to guidelines or standards in order to meet the administrative process for new housing. We have to allow them also the option to proceed without having to go through the public hearing process to review. So that is big change. And when you look at the proposed amendments to the historic chapter 30, you'll see a lot of changes to the table where we identify class 2 or class 3. But again, we give the applicant the ability to choose. So we're not, for closing the ability for a housing project to come to the landmarks commission, but we're also giving them to proceed without that if they should choose. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to allow adjustments to historic design standards today, like it was in our other overlay zones where we had guidance historic or design review guidelines and design review standards. The design review guideline review would go to the planning commission, and the historic landmarks commission guideline go to you guys. But in our process to streamline all of them are design guidelines in our overlay zones. And so here's another area where we're now going to change or allow adjustments to historic standards. And what's unique right now, landmarks commission adjusts historic design review applications. So if there is an adjustment to a standard, this will also for staff and how that chooses to proceed to be the body that the adjustment standard. So it's subject matter experts in terms of what is the underlying intent of the standard that they're asking to be from. And then another area where we're changing the process, this deals with approval criteria and how it relates to housing. So when you look at our land division chapter, which includes subdivisions, which divide land to create 4 more lots, or partitions, which divide land to create 3 parcels. We have criteria that need to be approved with an applicant that's demonstrator met. And under state law for housing, we're supposed to have objective standards and criteria. And when you look at some of our criteria today for the subdivision code, you'll notice that we have subjective, judgmental language that talks about minimizing impacts and considering, minimizing the degree of alteration to a site, which are not clear and objective. To have a clear and objective standard is supposed to be more measurable, kind of a yes or no answer to whether or not the standard is met. So we've gone through and where we have criteria that are not clear and objective for partitions and subdivisions, we propose those to be eliminated to bring in code and integrated performance with state law. There was also our class 3 site plan review chapter, which deals with it's the land use review process associated with building permits, so not land divisions. There's also a couple criteria in there that are not clear and objective, so we proposed amendments to those as well. And one maybe ones that aren't clear and objective. So that's what I use.
Great, so moving from process to use, the next proposed change would allow 1 and 2 family uses in mixed use buildings in the mixed use 1 and mixed use 2 zones. So today we generally do not allow a single family or 2 family in the mixed use 1 and 2 zones. Those zones are really intended for higher density mixed use development. However, there are some properties in Salem that are pretty small and can't necessarily fit 3 units, which is allowed in both of those mixed use zones. And so this change will allow a greater variety of housing, so you could have 1 unit or 2 units as long as it was within non-residential use. And this aligns with what we proposed and approved during our Salem project when we established the mixed use 3 project. So it still retains the vision of mixed use 1 and 2 being mixed use, but allows for a little bit more housing where those properties are small. The next would allow accessory dwelling units more broadly. So today, we allow accessory dwelling units basically with a detached house, a single family house. We've had some requests in the past to allow them with townhouses. And so these are attached units. And so this proposal would allow an ADU with townhouses, but only up to 2 attached units. So there would still be access on the sides to a detached ADU, for example, in the rear yard. So again, this would expand where ADUs could be allowed and will promote infill development. Another proposed change is to our standards. So we allow middle housing, 2 and 3 family, pretty broadly now in the city based on House Bill 2001. And what this change would do, it would align the minimum lot size in the multifamily 2 zone with the single family zone. So today in the multifamily 2 zone, you have to have a bigger lot, 6,000 square feet, to have middle housing than you would in the single family zone, which doesn't make any sense. The single family zone, you only need 4,000 square feet for 2 units and 5,000 square feet for 3 units. So this proposal would change those minimum lot sizes in the multifamily 2 zone to single family zone. And the next proposed change has to do with minimum density. So the city is working to implement the state's new climate-friendly and equitable community rules, which are very broad, but generally seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and promote housing and promote equitable communities. We've been working to implement these with, getting rid of minimum requirements, for example, is one of the implementation steps. So as part of this, there are 2 areas, the CB and the West Salem CB zone, that currently don't align with the minimum densities that are required by that state law. So these are areas through the Our Salem project that were identified as being our mixed use areas, in addition to other mixed use areas that we rezoned. And so in order for these to comply as what the state calls climate friendly areas, the city calls walkable mixed use areas, the minimum density in the downtown would need to be increased from 20 units per acre to 25 units per acre, which is way below what we're seeing in terms of development and density. And in the West Salem CB zone, it would establish a minimum density of 15 units per acre. Currently in that West Salem CB zone, which is really meant to be West Salem's downtown, there is no minimum density. And so this would establish that 15 units per acre, which aligns with what we established for all the mixed use zones, minimum density of 15 units per acre. Now I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Morris.
Starting in 2023, the Historic Landmarks Commission reviewed multiple proposals for security gates for fencing within Salem's downtown historic district. A lot of variation existed between the specific ones proposed. Some were approved, others denied. They all used the existing standards for evaluating the visual impact on the historic character of these. Based on this, the HLC identified the need to establish clearer criteria for security gates and fencing within Salem's downtown historic district. Under Goal 2, streamline historic code, criteria process and enforcement in the current HP plan, the 2023 work plan action item 6, improve and clarify code and education about design review process and criteria in their 2023 work plan. The HLC and the HP staff are directed to work on improving and clarifying historic code, which is SRC 230, as well as to develop educational materials to teach historic property owners and tenants about the historic design review process. The proposed standards for commercial security gates and fencing are the result of the study. Security feature standards apply to all buildings located within the downtown commercial historic district. They were developed through research and best practices found in other communities, consultation with multiple stakeholder groups within and without the community. And the standards are designed to strike a balance between added security, projecting a welcoming atmosphere, and protection of historic character. They are also designed to provide some flexibility to accommodate different types of security gates, while also being specific enough to avoid being arbitrary. A summary of the standards for these must incorporate design characteristics which minimize the overall visual impact of the security feature on the historic character defining features of the storefront, as well as the overall district. The standards only apply to recessed alcove or entry, not to storefront windows themselves. The materials must be a traditional material that is historically compatible. The overall visual impact of historic features must be minimized. They must be retractable so that when they're not in use, it is not noticeable as possible. And then also we don't want to inhibit access during normal business hours. And that is my summary of what we have for security gates and fencing.
Right. So in the vein of changes to downtown buildings, dealing with the facades and appearance. You will see in the CB zone, we want to establish consistent standards as much as possible between the city historic district, city outside historic district, CB zone in general. So there's three main areas where we've to the CB zone and the historic chapter to make sure requirements align. So the first one was gates and awnings. So that was that drafted for the gates and awnings, or sorry, gates, security gates and fences. Those will also apply in the CB zone, but obviously there's some different criteria in terms of compatibility and everything that don't apply outside of the CB's, outside the historic district in general, but you generally see the same standards in terms of the amount of void demands as we see through. You'll see that in the CB zone as well. So those are included in the amendment package. But beyond the security gates and fences, we also have requirements for canopies and awnings for weather protection. Obviously, we live in Oregon. It's hot, sunny, and warm in the summer, wet and rainy in the winter. So canopies and awnings are really important for weather protection. But when you compare the CB zone and the historic district today, the standards are a little bit different. And the standards are different from whether you're altering an existing building in the district or you're doing new construction. And in the CB zone for canopies and awnings, we require that there be a certain percentage, 90% of the building facade facing the street have weather protection in forms of awnings or canopies. And we have a minimum clearance height above the sidewalk of 8 feet. So we've always had a gap in our code when we're doing CB zone. We've never established a depth. So we've just had a minimum clearance height of 8, never a depth. So we've kind of been kind of lost to say what is the minimum depth. So in looking at other codes and other jurisdictions, 6 feet seemed to be reasonable depth for 2 tanks underneath. So in the CB zone, we've established a minimum awning or canopy depth of 6 feet. We've also applied that in the historic district as well for existing buildings or new construction. You have to have 8-foot clearance height above the sidewalk and a minimum depth of 6 feet. For new construction in the historic district, we've added a requirement that they have to have the same percentage of canopies and awnings along the street facing facade. So if you look at the Holden Hotel or the Nishioka building, those all have weather protection. For that new construction, there wasn't a standard that would have specified how much they needed to provide with those types of projects in the historic district. So this is establishing, these amendments will establish a standard that does identify a percentage to make sure that we do achieve the same amount of weather protection inside the district and outside the district. So that's some changes we did for canopies and awnings between the two areas. The other area was ground floor windows. So in the CB zone, we require, and the historic district, ground floor windows have to be see-through and transparent to create a pedestrian-friendly, active, vibrant facade. But the way the two zones go, well, the way the historic district goes about is a little bit different than the CB zone. It also will vary depending upon new construction versus existing buildings. So if you're doing development in the CB zone, new construction, you have to have 65% of the ground floor with transparent windows. And then there's a visible transmittance value applied through the windows of 37%. So we're taking those standards from the CB zone, historic chapter 230, sure that the window work is done for existing buildings. They have to have that same visibility through them. They can't be applications for visibility. And then in terms of new construction, like the hotel or the Nishioka, there will be 65% ground floor standard for facades facing the street or the plywood in the historic district and the CB zone to establish consistency between the two areas to create overall uniform appearance between the two areas in the downtown. And so, yeah, there were some other changes. We went beyond just housing, some kind of things. We did have interest from folks that are, since we have more people living downtown, people with pets. And so right now the CB zone doesn't allow any kind of animal services downtown. So we proposed to allow pet and then small animal veterinary services in the downtown, provide hopefully, market for veterinary for people with bigger pets. There's a bigger market for that. So we've added that to the CB zone as an allowance as a permit use. We've also had an issue with gravel storage areas. Today we just exempt gravel parking, from or vehicle storage areas from being paved. We've expanded that to just allow outdoor storage areas to not be paved in the IG zone specifically. because that's the only place where you can do storage that's not paved. So we've made that clear that it applies to any established storage area, and it might be something you can not have it paved, but you still need to meet your perimeter setbacks next to the street and abutting properties, as long as you're not abutting a property zone by G. If you're abutting a property zone by G, we don't care about perimeter setbacks, because the IT zone is the general industrial zone. It's kind of the most intense, impactful, industrial zone. So having a 5-foot landscape setback between two gravel parking areas, 5 feet on each side, really doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you have that same outdoor gravel storage lot, still have commercial terminals on property, so keeping. And then also we are requiring storage. Site plan, so we have not a whole lot of numbers. We have standards in the code that we need to apply, such as stormwater, and how we deal with stormwater, gravel, which are what yes. Some stormwater, so we're proposing gravel storage areas. Site plan. It's just like our parking is paid, so changes.
So we did receive some public comments. 2 comments, I think, came in after we did this presentation. They should be at your desk. The comments that we received prior to that, one was relating to the approval criteria that Mr. Bishop talked about in terms of special development standards. So special development standards are essentially just standards that may not necessarily apply to every property. So not every property, for example, is really steep and needs a geotechnical analysis. Not every property is in a floodplain zone. So it just kind of points out some of those specific standards that would apply. Anyway, those standards would be covered under the approval criteria that just meet all provisions of the UDC. We received comments from the Land Use Committee from SCAN. With general support is that they did not support changes to the new store process, and they requested several changes to the mixed use zones and the short-term rentals. The new historic process that Mr. Bishop explained is optional. So the process today to go through the Historical Landmarks Commission is retained under the proposed changes, but an applicant could choose to go through an administrative process. So the existing process is still available as an option. The changes to the mixed use zones have to do with minimum heights of the ground floor, and those zones, while they were established, I think in 2018, and we've expanded them through the RCM project, they're just beginning to see development occur in them. So staff will continue to track those to see if there are any barriers or any reasons that we might need to change some of those standards as development keeps occurring. So we want to take a holistic look at those mixed use zones instead of just looking at these 2 that were mentioned by SCAN. In addition, we are kicking off. Actually, we're in the process of a housing production strategy where we will be looking specifically at barriers to housing production, including regulatory barriers. So if these are regulatory barriers to housing, we will come back with those changes. On short-term rentals, the request was to prohibit them in residential zones. The staff did take a staff report to the City Council earlier this year with some policy options around short-term rentals, including prohibiting them. Council did not direct staff to make any changes in terms of prohibiting them, but asked us to essentially hire a third-party vendor to better track them. Like, where are these short-term rentals, so we can come back with some actual information before we have a recommendation to change what those are about. So staff recommends recommends that the HLC and the Planning Commission recommend that City Council accept first reading of the ordinance bill to amend the Salem Revised Code to promote housing development, comply with state rules and laws, and complete that.
Excellent, thank you very much. Do commissioners have questions for staff? Commissioner Weathers.
Concerning the canopy zoning in the central business district, CB zone, I understand on the street that about the sidewalk, would those also be required canopies?
No, it's always street facing.
I've got some questions, but I don't know if everybody has a chance to answer. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and go.
Okay, so I've just been taking down some notes as we were going through the presentation, so I'm just kind of referring to the staff report. I'm wondering about the adjustments, let's see, allowing adjustments for mixed-use properties in specific areas. Are there any historic districts that exist within these, zones that you're, suggesting not have this adjustment standard anymore, or we will be allowing adjustments in?
Do you mean districts or individual listed properties?
Yeah, I guess either, be curious to know. both.
Districts and the mixed use zones, this be the CD zone and our residential zones and the public historic districts, but individually listed resources, I wouldn't, go ahead and give a later change.
Okay, but if there was some sort of, design standard that was under 230, then the Historic Landmarks Commission would be taking that adjustment under consideration. That's kind of where that would fall in.
Well, so so the amendments that I was speaking about in the presentation, they apply only to applications for new housing units being created. So if the proposal does not include new housing units, then it's just the same process that has been, with the Landmarks Commission. So it's only if you're doing any kind of addition or an alteration or new construction that's creating new dwelling units, that's when this option for type 2 process comes in, and the ability for an applicant to ask for an adjustment to the standard rather than like how it is today, you go to it'd be a major review because it doesn't meet the standards and those guidelines instead.
Okay, great, that makes sense. I think just like kind of a general question, about the presentation, could you go into detail about what I understand a lot of this, change is coming from requirements from state law. Can you tell us what, if anything, is kind of above and beyond those minimum requirements?
Well, so in terms of, the state, the stuff that is historic, that is, just the minimum above and beyond the requirements, nothing, at this point, in terms of the criteria, we were just looking at the criteria for land divisions and site plan review. There could be other things that people might not view as project, but we're looking at the, criteria specifically for subdivisions, partitions, and site plan.
Okay, so kind of maybe with the exception of some of these little cleanup items, most of these things are specifically being required by the changes in state law.
No, like the allowing veterinary services and animal grooming, it's just something we've heard from.
Okay, cleanup kind of thing.
The streamlining process that is, in part of state law to allow for adjustments and administrative processes. But, so I guess the majority is. Correct me if I'm wrong, state law.
Yeah, the changes to allow 1 and 2 family and mixed-use building in the mixed-use zones, that comes out of local concerns, questions, development. Same with allowing ADUs with townhouses, that's not a requirement, it's just additional amounts that we've heard.
Okay, perfect. Let's see, I think a couple of questions that came up for me about the CB zone specifically, because it sounds like we're doing some more specific design standards about like canopy and awnings. Is an awning going to be a requirement downtown, or is it just if they want to do an awning, it has to be so big? So
when we look at the amendments to the historic chapters, there's standards for contributing, non-contributing in commercial historic districts. If it is, those are only going to deal with if you are. It doesn't require like 90% of the facade has to have canopies on it, because buildings might not have had back in time during the period that gets that much canopies and awnings, and the canopies and awnings could detract from the historical integrity of the resource. The same thing with windows. The building might not have that percentage of windows, so we don't want to say that now if you're changing facade, you need to do 65% windows on your ground floor facade. The percentages that the requirements to have 90% of canopies and awnings and 65% ground floor windows, that's for new construction.
Okay.
So like the home hotel or the niche building where you're doing a brand new building, and we want that building to kind of fit within the general character. And I think it's fair to say that generally sort of buildings in the downtown did have storefronts, large windows, and so having 65% and 90% canopy coverage does align with both that and the greater CB zone. But if you're looking at existing resources and you're making modifications, it's mainly for windows that's maintaining the transparency, you're not changing, you're not making them so they're not visible anymore. And then making sure with canopies and awnings, if you were to add one and it can be supported by historical evidence when existed, that you have You don't have to provide a percentage length of it, but you have to make sure it's at least 6 feet in depth and 8 feet across of the sidewalk.
Okay, great. So there's some allowances in the new proposals for like historic buildings and their contributing features.
Yeah.
If they don't match exactly what is in the
Makes
new standards. Okay, perfect. That was one of my questions. I don't think I have any other questions. Do any other commissioners? Oh, Commissioner Morris.
So I see this came through as a question from the West Salem Neighborhood Association, and I'm interested in some type of illumination on how this is going to work as a design professional. I'm sure as developers would approach this. What is, as adjustments move away from a review from a commission and become administrative, what are the guardrails in place so that it is objective, so that we have sort of consistent application of decision making, and how is that going to be transparent and put out so that we always know we can have kind of a similar response if this is being pursued on multiple project types?
Hi there, Lisa Anderson, will be your planning administrator. Well, there are approval criteria for adjustments found in the code, so the general criteria is that it's equally or better meeting the intent of the standards. So for example, if it's 5 feet setback in landscaping or 0 landscaping, we're trying to equally or better meeting that intent, right? So then to go through that, you send notice and receive comments before it's approved, and then it is appealable. So it can go through the public hearing process if people aren't happy. With the adjustments, we've taken most things out of public hearing review, so maybe not for the tenure of any of the planning commissioners that are here now, but for example, apartments used to come permit design instead of any adjustment, if there's just one standard they couldn't meet, we have a public hearing. Most of our all of our mixed use zones before our Salem had standards and guidelines, so the only way to get out of any standard was to have a public hearing with the planning commission, and that was changed. So it's not a new process. It's for the planning division and the zoning code. It's going to be new for historic, but it's really what we've done with the rest of the code. As far as if the HLC wants like a quarterly report on adjustments that have been approved or copies of the decisions or something like that, I'm sure we can work something out with Kimberly to make sure. And I think we already post all the historic administrative decisions on the webpage for requirements. Rule, I can't remember what the rule is or why, but I know they're there. And so we can provide that information if the commission wants to be able to see that and kind of see what the trends are and what people are asking.
The adjustment process it's not a clear and objective process in and of itself. There's under like the framework of clear and objective standards, if you just either meet it or you don't. And so if you can just meet the standard, well, you've obviously met the clear and objective path. But projects, not all projects can do that, so we provide this, limited land use discretion, limited land use decision, limited discretion process, and so, because it's appealable, that is, yeah, I don't know if we can standardize ever. It depends on the burden, what the standards being adjusted, the applicant, how they're demonstrating the deviation from the standards being met, like Lisa said, equally or better. If you eliminate a setback, making up for that setback in another creative fashion. So there's inherently discretion involved in the decision, to approve an adjustment. So there is that element, but in terms of having clear and objective standards, in the historic chapter, those standards are in chapter 230, and those. If you have the standard, staff can review them, and applicant can choose to take them to the Landmarks Commission to have them reviewed also. And if there's a deviation from that standard, they would be subject to those adjustment criteria. Again, this is said equal or better. The proposed development equal or better meets the intent of the standard that you're deviating from. And it won't, in the cumulative effect, if multiple adjustments are being requested, they won't have the effect of undermining the purpose of the code or the zone that's in, and that the adjustments won't impact surrounding properties. So the criteria aren't necessarily for an objective, and they're not required to be, because it's an adjustment you're asking for relief from the standard. So it's just meeting the standard itself. So
And I will say, I think at least in our current fee schedule, if they wanted to not meet more than one standard,
And the smart code is gonna be much cheaper to come to HLC than it is to apply for adjustments, for multiple adjustments are more expensive generally than agency review. So I don't know that we're gonna see a lot of people going for adjustments. I think they might find it's more efficient commission. And more than one thing that they're asking for some sort of TV to show to.
And just one clarification point, the only thing that someone going to HLC could ask an adjustment for is about new housing. They couldn't necessarily ask for an adjustment on a different standard if it doesn't have anything to do with new housing.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. This only applies to applications where new housing is being established.
All right, question?
Commissioner,
This is going through it for the record.
oh, perfect.
Thank you for the presentation. My mic turned off, there we go. With increased density comes increased traffic, increased need for infrastructure. And I know that our infrastructure system is, in some cases, needs some improvement. Have seen improvement. And added burden of expense for development of increased density, for traffic, for parking, for pedestrian access, and for infrastructure, all of which can be reflected through systems development charges and whatnot. So has that been taken into account for dense areas where parking is becoming limited, traffic is tense? And for example, with ongoing development proposed and current development, I believe I heard from the Downtown Advisory Board that the available parking we have today within 5 years could be on the verge of being maxed out. So are those considerations in place, and is it feasible to do the increased density from a development perspective? So even though the density goes up, is it still feasible for a developer to create that increased density? Tough one, sorry.
That's a good question. Yes, so holistically, we did a big increase in density with the RCLM project. And with that, the next project is the big updated transportation system plan. And with that, there's also many state rules that are coming down that are changing how we do any analysis related to transportation. And so we will be taking into consideration, how development impacts the transportation system and what changes we need to make while also aligning with new state laws and rules around it. In terms of density and I guess feasibility, is that kind of the question? We are, as part of a housing production strategy, looking at the feasibility of development in those mixed use areas where we rezoned recently during our Salem project to see if it's feasible with all those things, whether it's parking or are there tax incentives, like all the different factors that go into development. And so we're taking a look at that through that process to see if there are barriers or if there are gaps. And if there are gaps, what can the city do to actually close those gaps? So that process is ongoing currently as well. There's many projects going on.
So I'm thinking about coming and going from West Salem and down there in the former industrial area. It's already tight, it's already jam-packed. And so with increased density right in that area, it seems like it could have a pretty significant impact on people coming and going with that level of density. So I'm reading through the comments and I can see both sides, but I also see what I see out the windshield on a daily basis, and it's busy. So with that increased density, are we prepared for that?
Sure, and I should also add that the climate friendly equitable rules that the density is trying to implement, eventually when we do come back to actually adopt climate friendly areas, which I think we'll do in like 2025, 2026 timeframe, there are a whole host of requirements on a transportation analysis that needs to be done in and around those climate friendly areas, including multimodal gap analysis, like what are the gaps in sidewalk and pedestrian analysis, what are the impacts on any highways? So we would look at Wallace, right? What are the impacts? What are the mitigations? So there's a whole process built into when we actually go to adopt those climate friendly areas, what the impact is on the transportation system.
You answered one of my questions for me, traffic impact analysis. Have those studies been performed in relation to these increased densities?
Those will be happening again at the adoption when we actually formally ask for the adoption. And I should mention that 15 units per acre, which is what we kind of adopted citywide in our mixed use zones, right, our multifamily 2 zones, that essentially equates to 1 unit per 4,000 square foot lot, which is essentially our single family zone, and you can have 1 unit on a 4,000 square foot lot. It is not very dense. But I just wanted to.
But it was formerly food processing, so it 15 or 10 or 5, it's gonna be a significant increase either way, so I thank you.
Great, questions from any of the other commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner, I'm sorry, I can't see your name.
Commissioner Rhodes.
So, going into kind of the whole density thing, so 70 feet tall in West Salem seems like a large impact from height, with what we have down in West Salem, kind of in the overall landscape of that area. Would that impact, current buildings, or is it only new buildings happening in West Salem? So if Ross were to have a change in use or a remodel to their building, would they have to comply with this?
To the maximum height in the West Salem city zone?
Sorry, for the density, the 15 unit density,
New development.
new development. Okay, thank you. And what, just curious, what for the downtown CD zone, what is the height for that?
I don't think we have a maximum height in the CD zone.
Okay.
And I should just clarify, any minimum density that we have in Salem and our mixed use zones, including what would be established in the West Salem mixed central business districts, only applies to purely residential developments. So if you do any sort of mixed use, there is no minimum density because we want to promote the addition of housing to commercial sites. So there would be no minimums. You would have 1 unit, 2 unit. It's only when you do a full multifamily that the minimum density would kick in. Perfect, thank you.
More questions? Commissioner Dritt?
Let's talk about downtown and pets. So my office downtown, I typically bring my dog with me to work and he's my companion. But I've noticed that there are very few, if any, options for animals to go outside. And I've noticed when Codes on State opened, a lot of residents moved in and leased it up very quickly. That's fantastic, but they also brought their beloved 4-legged family members. And it kind of took a toll on some of our streetscape, our planters and our trees and our boxes. I'm concerned that if we allow veterinary and grooming services downtown, the daily piles that I have to walk around will increase because there are I park at Riverfront Park and I walk from the park to State Street where my office is. And I have Riverfront Park at my disposal, but once I get into downtown, really isn't much. And so I'm concerned about what's already on the sidewalks and the streets and seeing that increased. So
Well, I guess I would just maybe say that if you're bringing your animal or down there with you, or if you're living in the downtown, it's already there, and so by providing, the grooming or veterinary services, is allowing those folks to, have a service for their animals that currently doesn't exist, and I don't know if that's gonna result in like increase of the amount of, out on the sidewalk. So that's a little bit of an unknown, but the standards do, at least in terms of noise and impacts, you do have to be within a completely enclosed building. You can't let a dog run or anything inside the alley or something. Things like that. So we try to put that limitation, qualification on the uses to, minimize impact. But I think, and I don't know if these are going to be, if you have a vet service downtown or anything, it's going to be like a draw to pull in like folks that. I guess it could potentially draw people in from, surrounding neighborhoods, but again, you're probably bringing your animal directly there, picking it up and stuff, staying there once, being attended to, and you take it with you, so you may not be necessarily walking around, for it to go to the bathroom on the streets, but, so it's a little bit of an unknown. We felt that it was, we've had a desire from folks that live downtown, want to see this, and we feel that it's a natural fit, people living downtown, at least, provide that little bit of a service, for grooming and vet services, but it's more of a question of like, can we make areas that are friendly for dogs to go to the bathroom, like smaller pocket dog parks. It's kind of something that comes with urban animals.
Okay, everybody's gotta go at some point, and, without a place to go, I'm concerned about it. So I understand the need for it downtown, but, also, you know, has potential to create more of a mess, so, you know.
Great, more questions?
I would ask a question, thank you.
Go for it.
Commissioner Tigan. Eunice, maybe could you characterize, not good, bad, or indifferent, some of the comments that came in from the neighborhood associations, about seeming, just suggesting adjustments to different elements of the code? Is that just, do you see? I didn't see in the staff report discussions about changing heights within, you know, the first floor of or the minimums on heights on Second Street, that sort of thing. I just wanna be clear why, if there's a reason why you think the neighborhood associations were commenting on it.
My understanding is that there have been a couple developments in SCAN where those developments have asked for adjustments to those specific standards around minimum ground floor height. And those adjustments, I think, were granted. And so I think they think, well, then we don't need to have them. But I think we've only had a couple developments, so we kind of want to see how it keeps going, right? Is everyone asking for adjustments? Are these standards really not working or not? So we just haven't had enough to really make a call.
So with this UDC change being proposed, perhaps the neighborhood associations are just saying, well, let's put our ideas on this vehicle.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any more questions for staff?
Yeah,
Commissioner
I
True?
got more questions. Come on, guys. All right, the security improvements, are those eligible for URA incentives for improvements to the property? So security gates, barriers, doors, are those eligible for URA improvements?
That's a question, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yes.
Yeah, in term, Jacob Morris, in terms of like, I know in the historic downtown, there is incentive programs that are taking advantage of with that. And I believe the other ones are as well.
I think it's a critically needed resource at certain times for certain shop owners. I know we've experienced vandalism and break-ins. But it sounds like to align with historical standards, it also could be a burdensome expense for a property owner or a business owner. So as long as there's a mechanism to assist in that financial expense of a business or property owner, I think that would assist with the process.
And it's a volunteer standard, though, it's not a requirement. So if you're gonna do one, then you have to comply with those standards. So I'm not saying you have to provide it.
But if you're gonna do it, you have to comply with those standards and comply with historical standards. Nothing in compliance with historical standards is cheap. I can tell you that from having a historical house, everything was more expensive. So that's kind of where the question came from. And then I'll quit asking questions after this one for the time being at least. The window transparency, one of our prominent figures downtown is Pioneer Trust Bank. They've got very dark windows. I think probably to their benefit in daylight. I don't know what the transparency is. But if one of their windows shatters and they have to replace it, do they have to replace it to the transparency standards that are proposed, or can they replace what they originally had?
No, they would need to the standards, because you're now replacing, you know, something that's lost, anything that was non-conforming. So it would be something that they could ask for an adjustment for if that was the case, generally if you're gonna put windows back, we want those new windows to be put back. It's the standard.
Okay, great. Then I think we can go ahead and move on to any testimony from the neighborhood association, if there's anybody from the neighborhood association here. And if you could state your name and address for the record, please, that would be great. You've got 15 minutes.
I'm Steve Anderson with the West Salem Neighborhood Association's 3240 Delaware Road. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission and the Historical Landmark Commission. Basically, you see in our testimony, we support the streamlining, but as the conversation goes here, the caveat, This is a change from a public hearing to an individual. And we think that there should be some clear and objective statement for that. That's a preamble. We had a great conversation, but it's not in writing, it isn't there. There should be something that says how this is going to be done, like they talked about here, and maybe the possibility for peer review. So we suggest that you consider that, maybe a preamble to this that deals with the issues that were raised in that conversation. Secondly, we've included a letter that we sent today to the attorney regarding the statements that these will update and make these standards in compliance with state law. We've had two cases, East Park versus the city of Salem, or Luba, and the Titanville case where the city council acknowledged they did not have the authority to administer standards to cause a judicial hearing. Therefore, all of these strikes, markouts, we believe should have a legal opinion before you make a decision to say that this upgrade will meet state standards. Otherwise, you are speaking without any kind of support. Secondly, let's deal with the Second Street issue. The question was asked, why are we doing it now? When the Edgewater District was created, there was a big discussion because there was a craft industrial proposed zone by staff earlier that just fell flat, didn't work. So we worked out the Edgewater Second Street zone, and as part of that, we wanted to increase density along Second Street, increase commercial and help that area develop, but it backs against a residential on an alley. So we wanted the height at 40 feet to preserve people's right to have sun in their garden or have solar panels. Rereading this code, we saw that that condition was missed. So it's an oversight that we're trying to correct. That's why we're asking that that provision be written into the code as it was negotiated at the time with staff and the people as we created that zone. And lastly, as to the issue of West End Business District and minimum density, couple things there. One, Eunice spoke very nicely, but she was not quite right. The OAR that says this allows for an alternative to this 15 unit density. It doesn't have to be 15. In addition, this is premature because this has not been designated a climate friendly area yet. She said 2025. So until then, this doesn't need to happen. This was negotiated as part of the R Salem district. We've worked with the business leaders and people that encourage commercial development in the business area. We need business and jobs before we can have people not go across the bridge all the time. And so this idea was just to leave this open with no minimum to allow this area to develop in a way that would encourage residential, infill, mixed housing, but also commercial. In addition, there was no traffic impact analysis done for this zone change. It's not in the record. Walsh Road is currently not meeting mobility standards. It is shown between now and 2032 to continue to exceed mobility standards. It's a state highway. This increase in density without traffic impact analysis will violate the current Salem transportation system plan. And as part of the R Salem process, Public Works got up and said it's a state law that they had to evaluate traffic impacts as part of R Salem. They made the decision that the Walsh corridor was not a significant impact because of this choice to have a minimum density. If this is put in place, this minimum density, that nullifies and voids all of those assumptions. Therefore, the R Salem decision has a problem legally in that this will make this null and void. Therefore, we are recommending that you pull in that table the minimum density out and not include it as part of this package. It's not needed, it's premature, it violates the traffic transportation system plan and the mobility studies, the transportation analysis has not been done for what this will do for that Wallace Road corridor that currently doesn't meet standards. So that's where we come to the neighborhood solutions. We support where you're going. We think there needs to be some legal cleanup here as far as what's going on, fix Second Street issue, and pull the mobility standard. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, can you
tell us at what time the agreement for the Second Street and the alley was negotiated? Was that as part of our sale or before our
It
sale?
was before, it was when when the original Second Street zone was put in place. Prior to that, that industrial area down there where the canneries were, the public works, planning came to us, to the neighborhood and talked about putting that as a craft industrial zone to support growth and development. 2 years into that process, the developers and the owners of those projects said, this doesn't work, we cannot get people to buy our property. So there was a revision of that Second Street zone, what's now the Edgewater Second Street zone, which was designed to create walkable neighborhoods, pedestrian friendly corridors in that area, but also increase commercial development along Edgewater Street and try to create a business district. But as part of that, Third Street and an alleyway right against Second Street, that's a residential area going all the way up to the hill. We wanted to set a natural buffer in there. So that was why the 40-foot height was good.
Right,
And suggested, yes.
and I guess my question was, what year was that? Was that 2015? Was that
Oh, I
1998? Or was that,
I'd have to go back and look, honestly.
you have a decade?
Yeah, it was done somewhere around 2014 to 2018.
2014 to 2018, okay,
Yeah, somewhere in that.
thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Alrighty, is there anybody else here from a neighborhood association? I don't see anybody else, so I think that we can go ahead and move on to names from the sign-up sheet. I have E.M. Easterly. Please state your name and your address for the record, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members of the 2 commissions, I appreciate your taking testimony this evening. I am E.M. Easterly. I live in Ward 8 in West Salem. I fully support the intent and purpose of the staff effort to bring a change and improvement to the UDC, Unified Development Code. I specifically support the areas and focus that you have received and want to thank both Ms. Kim and Mr. Bishop for bringing clarifications to some of the issues that I raised last week. One of the emphases that Mr. Bishop spoke about was making sure that our city's development code conforms to the requirements of state law. That's a very perfectly positive goal. As Mr. Bishop indicated, the whole idea of dealing with special conditions that was defined for you by Ms. Kim can be handled in
E.M., can you turn your mic back on?
My apologies. I asked staff a question last week. Based on part of what is 204 pages long, here they are, including section 205, which is the subdivision tentative approval process. And there was a listing there. I don't know how many of you looked through all 204 pages. I have, but I use this as an example. And I asked staff, but I haven't yet heard an answer. What is the definition of special development standards? I think our 2 members of staff did a good job of explaining that, but then I asked 2 other questions. How is preservation of trees and vegetation a special development standard? And the second major one I asked, what are the standards associated with quote geological and geotechnical analysis that are special development standards? In summary, unless those standards are clear, the question that was asked by a member of this board, how do we know if they're being met or not? That's my basic question. And on that particular basis, I encourage you to look at how all of these different elements that have been aggregated in one piece have been put together and can be approved for going on to the city council. There's things here, as Mr. Anderson has pointed out, that don't quite work the way it is right now. And I ask that you, in this process, take the time to either postpone a decision or ask for the kinds of changes that have been here. I invite you to consider 2 more topics that I asked you to think about putting under the special conditions area. And that is compliance with the American with Disabilities Act and the special condition where we ran into a problem and developed recently, where what was a specific standard was avoided for several reasons. And I'll just leave it alone. I don't want to go into past history, but that area are the elevations for the different street, a collector, and or a local street. Can they be switched? And what is a justified way of doing that? I leave it alone. I invite you as a body to make a decision tonight, but postpone a final decision until you have had invited staff to consider each of the issues that have been raised. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time. Alrighty, I don't have anybody else from the testimony sheet. I've got Steve on here, but you were testifying for your neighborhood association. Okay, great, perfect. Is there anyone else who would like to testify? I don't see anybody. So I think that we can move on to the next step, which would be additional questions of staff before we close the public hearing.
I'd ask an additional question.
Go for it.
Just Eunice, want to make sure that I heard correct, that there would be an additional traffic impact analysis conducted before the city council adopts the changes, specifically in West Salem. Did I hear that correctly?
Before we adopt what the state calls climate friendly areas, that come with a whole host of rules and analysis. For that adoption occurs, which I think would be 2026, there would be a traffic analysis that's required by the state to do that, not with the minimum density.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions?
What we would take a vote on it today.
Commissioner Truitt, you have a
before-
question?
Yes, before
Perfect.
the TIA. So we would vote here prior to having the information from traffic impact analysis.
Correct. And it's not just a traffic impact analysis, it's a highway impact, a multimodal gap analysis, a whole host of transportation analysis that would have to happen with all those climate friendly areas, not just the downtown and inner West Salem.
Perfect. Staff, do you think you could give us just a short overview on the rest of the process for the code amendment?
Yeah, so with the landmarks commission, the planning commission takes action tonight, and we're going to recommend city council approval of this. We will put a findings document together, notice will be sent, to everybody specified and all the folks who received notice of this hearing tonight. And then we will take an ordinance forward here on the council agenda for this first reading item, with the recommendation. There's 2 routes to go. They can, since for a legislative process, you're only required to have 1 public hearing, which this would serve as that hearing, or we would be recommending that the public hearing be held, with the council. So the ordinance will appear on the council, agenda with your recommendation. They will then, hopefully go with our recommendation at public hearing, and then they'd have their own separate public hearing, take testimony, consider the amendments, and then if they agree with them, adopt them. And then 30 days after that, or then the next after that public hearing, they go to second reading, which is the next council meeting after they have a public hearing, which gives anybody interested the chance to potentially raise any other issues. And then if they pass the second reading, then 30 days later it becomes effective. So it's starting in your schedule.
implementation being here
Probably October.
October.
Okay, so there will most likely be another public hearing for folks to talk about any issues they might have some questions about. If we do decide to go forward today.
We would recommend a hearing at the council.
Great, good to know. Any other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner, I'm sorry, I can't see your last name.
Commissioner Villarreal.
Excellent, thank you.
Just in regards to the discussion about the agreement for the 40-foot maximum building height, is anyone on staff, were they part of that discussion? I mean, does anyone have any records of that, or, I mean, did it just kind of disappear, or does anyone know what occurred with that?
Well, I was just looking, it's been 50 feet since 2018, that was the last time we did an amendment, so this used to be an area that had a base zone and an overlay, and so went together in 2018, we combined those into one zone, so you didn't have to like know your base zone and know your overlay and figure out which applies to you. So we did that in 2018, it was 50 feet then. I know Mr. Anderson has brought this up before, I think during our Salem, and the council chose not to change it, is that right? No, something like that. Yeah, we did propose a change of it. It's not the first time. Or this, I can't remember what hearing it was, and I know Mr. Anderson has brought it up before. It's been 50 feet since it was 2018.
I was just saying, my understanding, I hope it was not, but my understanding is that there was a lot of discussion about that zone budding up to single family residential, and the result was a 20-foot setback from the residential zone, including if there's an alley.
I recall that as well, so I think that was what the council ended up adopting, was the larger setback to accommodate for the height.
All right. Any other questions? This is our last chance for new information, so. Okay, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. No additional testimony will be accepted at this time without formally reopening the hearing. I will now call for a motion.
Kirsten, I'm sorry, Commissioner Strauss. And I think I only told you before, but our legal staff is recommending that the HLC have a motion to just vote on the changes in 230. And then the planning commission would make a motion to vote on the rest of the code amendments. So
Perfect.
maybe HLC would.
Yeah, we can go ahead and start with the HLC. So HLC members, I will go ahead and entertain a motion specifically on the changes to chapter 230.
I'll move to approve the historic code changes to 230 as written. Second.
All right, we've got a motion by Commissioner Timbrook and a second by Commissioner Inman. To your motion.
I don't want to have anything. I think we've been very thorough in our hearings on this subject.
Perfect. Any discussion? All right, I will go ahead and take a vote, and since there's a lot of people, I think I'll just have everybody raise their hand from the HLC. All in favor of approving the proposed changes for chapter 230, please raise your hand if you're from the HLC. All right, I see Commissioner Timbrook, Commissioner Weathers, Commissioner Strong, Morris, Inman, Perdaman, and Strauss have all voted yes. Any nay? All right, that motion passes. We'll now go ahead and go to the Planning Commission. I will go ahead and entertain a motion for the Planning Commission.
I'll move to adopt the report as it reads. I'll second.
All right, perfect. And we've got a motion by Commissioner Fott and a Fott, is that right? Okay, and then second by, I don't know your last name. Heller, perfect. Commissioner Heller. Can you like see everybody's face? All right, go ahead to your motion.
I think just to touch on a couple of items that have been brought up today, generally in support of all of this. I did want to just speak to the small animal veterinary and grooming services in downtown. I think in a lot of ways it is also an equity issue, and I do appreciate the lack of not having a place to go. But I do think that's something that can be explored as we continue forward. But there are a lot of people who do have small animals and do not have cars. So having access to those services, I think, is welfare for not only the animal, but people that we're encouraging to live more and more urban environment. And then regarding the minimum density, I think Venus really explained that quite clearly. And the idea of encouraging more business along with housing, I think is a really good point. And by eliminating that minimum density in a mixed use is something that is, I think, speaking to that. So I just ultimately in favor of everything as is. Thank you.
More discussion from the commissioners? Or are you ready to detail? Okay, I see nods. So we'll go ahead and take a vote for the planning commission on the changes that are proposed that are not part of chapter 230. So we will go ahead and do the same thing. If you would like to vote yes and for the planning commission, go ahead and raise your hand now. All right, and if you would like to vote no for the proposal, please raise your hand. All right, and I just see one vote no, so that means that the motion will carry. All right, that means that we are done with the public hearing. Very exciting. All right, the motion passes. We're gonna be done with conversation on that. All right, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, but we don't have any more agenda items, so that's pretty exciting. So I think I can go ahead, unless staff has any other things they'd like to address, I can go ahead and go ahead.
Just a reminder for the planning commission that you have a joint work session with the city council next Monday here, and it doesn't start till 6. Also, really brought snacks, so please eat them, especially when right snacks normally.
All right, perfect. I will go ahead and close the June 11th, 2024 joint meeting between the planning commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. Thank you, everybody.